Welcome to Beyond the Bots. And a big welcome because we've got over 40,000 followers now watching us. So thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Blair from FIRST Headquarters. We are really excited about this series where we intend to help the FIRST community stay connected, to encourage interaction between teams and headquarters, and to spotlight and share your team successes as you tackle the challenges. Now, we'll be broadcasting shows throughout the season, every couple of weeks or so be sure to join us. At the moment, we're unable to gather at events, so we're gathering remotely here on Beyond the Bots. And we'll be featuring plenty of really interesting people from around the FIRST galaxy. Now, today's first episode focuses on game design. And I guarantee this show will be fun. It will be informative, surprising, and I know you'll leave with a few helpful tips and tricks from our seasoned guests and game designers. If you have some game design questions for our experts, please submit them in the chat. That's what it's there for, and we'll try to answer them during our live question and answer segment at the end of the show. Now, we've got some cool, behind the curtain, never seen before by the FIRST community kind of stuff coming at you, presented by a fabulous group of game designers as we dig deeply into our game design process. Today, we'll share how we run game design for all the programs at FIRST, beginning with the FIRST Robotics Competition. And after we've covered the FRC process, we'll hear about game design process for FIRST LEGO League and FIRST Tech Challenge. And then we'll close the show with a live Ask Me Almost Anything Q&A with designers from all three programs. This season, there are so many resources available to assist you. We have videos from our suppliers on the FIRST Robotics Competition YouTube channel going live today at 2 p.m., specifically created to help you, the teams. Now be sure to check them out. And thanks to our suppliers as well. Also, take a look at the Game Design Challenge activities on the Infinite Recharge Season Materials webpage. There you'll find some great videos, exercises, and presentations to give you ideas and help you get started on the game design journey. We suggest starting with the Speak Like a Game Designer activity. Now, FRC game designers use a specific vocabulary, and this activity is super helpful to understand what we mean by certain words or phrases in many of the other activities. This vocabulary will also be useful in your game designing. A reminder that the frcathome.org portal opens on February 4th and closes March 4th, so be sure to hit the deadlines. Another resource we just created for you, which will also post on the FRC YouTube channel today at 2 p.m., is a comprehensive show about the awards. And we go directly to the judges and some teams to get tips and tricks about all the FRC awards this year. It's super informative and divided into the components of the 2021 season, so you can scroll to the various sections. Now, the judges tell you exactly what they're looking for in the submissions and the interviews, as do the Woody Flower Award winners and the FIRST Dean's List and Chairman's winners. So what are you waiting for? Well, it's not 2 p.m. Be sure to check it out after 2 o'clock today. Now, the FRC Judge Show is part one of a two-part series. We'll follow up the Judge Show with a live question and answer with our chief head judges, Cindy Stong and Alan Bancroft, in an Ask Me Almost Anything About Award show on January 30th at 12 p.m. Eastern. So watch the Judge Show part one and then tune in for the live Q&A on the 30th. This year, we've laid out some exciting options for the teams. And really, we want teams to participate in all of the challenges. Hopefully, your team is already working on the Game Design Challenge, Infinite Recharge at Home and the Skills Challenge, the FIRST Innovation Challenge sponsored by Qualcomm, and the traditional submitted awards. There is definitely something for everybody this year. And be sure to share your team stories at hashtag FirstGameChangers, which we'll be monitoring and looking for teams to highlight later in our Beyond the Bot series. Okay, it's time to start the game design journey. And what better place to start than with story? FRC began incorporating story not so very long ago, and to help us, we teamed up with Walt Disney's Imagineers. In the Global Innovation Awards show last June, we interviewed Disney Imagineers Margaret Carrison and Scott Trowbridge, who were part of the creative force behind Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. That segment was very cool, and they shared some terrific insights. But today, we've got two more Imagineers. We're excited to have two of the world's best storytellers, a couple of creatives who've helped us on our game stories here at the FIRST Robotics Competition. All right, we're here with some friends from Walt Disney Imagineering, Joey and Joe. They've helped out with FRC game design in the past. We're going to dig into their minds a little bit and talk about storytelling, which is so important in our game design. Guys, why don't you introduce yourselves? Joey?
Hi, I'm Joey Caparasso. I work with Walt Disney Imagineering as a creative producer. I've been with Disney for going on 24 years, and I'm hitting my first decade with Walt Disney Imagineering.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank
Joe.
you.
I'm Joe Lemoyne, working with Walt Disney Imagineering Story Development, going on 10 years working in that department, basically doing everything from trying to develop the stories behind lands and attractions to restaurants, shops, food carts, you name it.
Wow. So I know a lot of people think Imagineering is this like cool job title, but what does it really mean? Like, what's your Joey? What's your day-to-day job? What project are you working on right now?
Yeah, so it's a cool job title. It's also a really cool job. As a creative producer, I work with all the different creative teams, the writers, the artists. I partner with the architects and the engineers to help bring our story to life and to make sure that we're telling that story and sharing those experiences with our guests. So my day today is all over the place. I'm with a project from the very moment that the idea is conceived to delivery on opening day to our guests. In the early stages, it's working closely with the writers and the artists to help conceptualize what that experience might be. And then it's feeding that to our architects and our engineers and helping ensure that that story is coming to life through their design. It's a very iterative, integrated process where we're all working together kind of in this stew pot of ideas, making sure that we can bring those moments to our guests in a way that's safe and operable for the park itself.
My day-to-day, I feel it's a lot less complicated than Joey's, but that doesn't mean it's not filled with pain. As a writer, I put a lot of what we talk about on the page so that that can get circulated amongst, all the people that, not just Joey, but we all, come into contact with all the other Imagineers, try to start fleshing out what exactly the experience that we're trying to create is going to be. Probably my favorite project I've worked on was Soaring Fantastic Flight for Tokyo Disney Sea. And it was just an interesting challenge to take this IP of soaring and make that fit in 1901 Mediterranean harbor in Italy. And, having this modern day story work in the context of, old world Italy. And in the process, we got to create new characters and add to our franchise of the Society of Explorers and Adventurers.
Fun. Yeah, it's kind of a fun day job, huh? So now let's talk about let's talk about storytelling. FIRST Robotics Competition only introduced story into our sort of lexicon about 5 years ago with Stronghold, and Joe, you were involved in that one. So, what we're trying to get to our teams is like, don't just think about the game. Think about what's behind the game, because that might be able to help you. And we were, honestly, sort of slow to believe in that. So, but you've convinced us. So, Joey, talk about a little bit about like, how do you approach storytelling? Why is it important?
Yeah, story is a design tool, much in the same way that art or engineering or down plans or any of those sorts of things are design tools. They help guide a team in the way that they think about a problem they're trying to solve, and it's also a way to connect with the people who will be watching or playing your game. So what we typically do at Imagineering, we love to believe that we come in, we have this really great story idea, and then that manifests itself as this physical experience. But sometimes we have to work backwards. Sometimes we have to work sideways. So, there's a lot of different ways we'll use stories. Sometimes it is to launch an idea, and sometimes it is to work through an idea. But one of the things that story gives us is, a FIRST team, much like a team at Walt Disney Imagineering, is made up of a variety of personalities, a variety of backgrounds, just a diverse population of people who all have their own context for how they see the world. And what a really good grounded story based on thematic elements does is provide one particular vision so that everybody knows what to work and design to, and ultimately what the goal is for the guests once they experience that thing. So that's the way we approach story. And it is something that's kind of built into our culture. I think everybody who works at Walt Disney Imagineering is constantly asking, what's the story? How does the story fit in here? I have this problem I can't solve. Can story help solve it? Or your story doesn't work here. Can we work together to figure out how you might modify that story in order so that it does work? And that gives everybody one direction to work towards. And regardless of what background or the way you see the world or your context for the experience you're creating, you can kind of rally behind one idea that then feeds itself through the design. And if you're successful, the guests will feel that once they experience that attraction or play that game.
And Joe, it seems like there's got to be a ton of pressure on the writers in the beginning, because the writers are storytellers, and you might have the mechanical engineers and the architects and the producer saying, yeah, all right, yeah, here's the idea, just come back with something. So what does that feel like? Is that exciting or frightening?
You would think that there would be that kind of pressure. The thing is that everybody at Imagineering, they're geniuses and they love story. And, I think what the story perspective that we bring is more in terms of, thematics, and really, as Joey was talking about, it being a design tool. When you have this vision, using story to make sure that, what is being a part of the experience all fits and works together. We're not just adding things that are cool, because sometimes, cool can distract you from what someone is trying to say and take away the meaning of, what's really important. And the thing I want to say about, why we tell stories, it's something that's so ingrained in us. I was listening to a writer talk about why storytelling is important. And what he was saying was that, when you're a baby, first you need your food, you need your shelter, you want to make sure you're loved. But after all that, when you're a kid, you're always asking for stories. You want to hear stories. And that's how we learn to navigate this crazy world that we live in, is through storytelling.
When I first started working there at the associate level, and Joe, I believe you came in as an intern, and it's probably, I'm assuming true for you too, is that we have a very open and honest way we communicate with each other. Not to say there's not heavy debate or different ways to approach a problem to solve, but the forum is typically open as we're working through these problems to discuss and come up with ideas. And then the creative director will take either the spirits of the notes themselves, or the inspiration from those notes to begin to kind of refine their vision. And we work on some pretty complex projects across the world. I think we probably work on some of the most complex, at least in the entertainment industry. And the creative director can't be there to solve every single problem that's presented to them. But they need to make sure that the people who are working on their project know the answer without having to come to them. So that's what story does for us.
All right, so now let's get to the storytelling behind like Infinite Recharge and how you were involved with that. Joe, I think you helped quite a bit. You want to talk about how you were involved with the Infinite Recharge?
I feel like Joey.
Yeah, I could jump in because I think I brought Joe into it. So when we started working on story, even before Infinite Recharge, and I was asked to help kind of bring story to FIRST and guide it. I think I understand what we do pretty well, but to have somebody who really speaks it very well and can really take those ideas and turn them into something I knew there was no one better than Joe. So I brought Joe on this journey with me. And so when we found out about Infinite Recharge and its connection with Star Wars, we wanted to make sure that we gave the FIRST team all the tools that they needed in order to tell that story. And there were some things about Infinite Recharge that were very explicitly Star Wars, and some things that were kind of a story unto themselves. And we needed to find a way to kind of bring that all together so it was one cohesive experience, both for the players and for the and for the audience watching the game. And so that's where we brought Joe back in, because he had helped us in previous games. And then we also reached out to many of the people who had led Star Wars Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland and Disney Hollywood Studios in Florida. And we were really fortunate that we kind of, when that happened, was kind of like the first phase of Galaxy's Edge had just opened, and they were kind of in that in between time before the second phase was about to open. So we were able to bring in a lot of the original creative directors and storytellers from Galaxy's Edge to come in. And then we had members of the FIRST team come down to Anaheim, and we did this kind of 2 or 3 day kind of integrated game design charrette, where we took the tools of Infinite Recharge and the story that was being told there, the spirit of Star Wars, and kind of blended that all together to become what the players experience with Infinite Recharge.
Wow. And is it as specific as naming, playing field pieces, game elements, driver stations? Like what's the level of detail that you get into?
Yeah, so instead of starting with call that lightsaber because it's shaped like this, it was really about what is the story that we're telling through this game. And we came up with, I think it was 4 different versions of the story. So we knew what the game mechanics were going to be, and we knew what the general gameplay was going to be, and we had some wiggle room in there on how we might be able to manipulate that a bit as the story evolved. So this was kind of one of those things where instead of just starting from nothing, we started with a sketch of what the experience was going to be. So taking that, the way we worked in this particular charrette is we then broke, we blended each team with a FIRST representative and an Imagineering representative, and usually an Imagineer who worked on Star Wars representatives, because there's folks of us who weren't on the Star Wars project who participated in this, and then kind of together worked out, well, how do you make sense of this within a Star Wars type story? And do we focus on battle? Do we focus on the diverse cultures of these different planets? Do we focus on agriculture? I mean, Star Wars gives you so many different ways to kind of approach that universe. And then from there, kind of pitch to each other what these ideas were, began to take the things we liked about different ideas, blending them into one idea that ultimately became the thing. And through what that story was that we developed, that's where we said, okay, well, if that's the story, then we could take this this really popular iconography of Star Wars and begin to kind of layer those things into this game that then becomes kind of the paint that makes it a Star Wars experience that you could just look at it and know it's a Star Wars thing.
So, sometimes I think people hear some of the boundaries that we might have to deal with and think, that could be a problem for creativity. But I feel like, a lot of these challenges that you face as an artist, as a writer, anything in the creative field, that they can most often lead to greater creativity. It forces you to use, your creative mind in a way that you weren't expecting. You're not going for the lowest hanging fruit. So we can't use, the characters that maybe most people would want to go to. And, it led us to think of a story that took place, somewhere outside of the Star Wars world, and imagine life on another planet and how people and characters outside of the worlds we know, people more like us, just doing normal everyday things, are dealing with a situation and using things that are familiar in the Star Wars universe to do that, like droids.
Cool. Well, we're going to wrap it up now, and I just want to say, you've given great reasons for our team to come up with a story behind their game as they start designing their games. Like, the benefits, it seemed exponential. And I love the point at the end there, Joe, about the boundaries that you feel constrained by are actually sort of liberating in a way. making you think maybe more creatively than you would have. That's great advice too. So a big thanks to both of you, Joel, for everything you've done for FIRST and will continue to do, hopefully. And thanks a lot for helping the teams out today with like the storytelling behind game design. Take it easy, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
We'll see you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
A big thanks to Joe and Joey and to the Imagineers for all their work. They are rock stars. Now, there's a game design activity which you can explore called The Power of Storytelling. It explains the power and purpose of incorporating story elements into a FIRST Robotics Competition game and is the process that we go through to develop a story for our recent games. But before you start with story and your brainstorming, we suggest you try the hats and glasses activity. Now, this helps a team understand the differences between members' roles and their perspectives, and how to communicate with teammates. It also helps teams understand the diverse perspectives and roles team members and mentors bring to the table. We heard from Joe and Joey just how important that is. So, how does the game design process work for the FIRST Robotics Competition? Well, honestly, it's been evolving, and I'm sure that your process will as well. Earlier this week, I checked in with a group of my colleagues and game designers here at FIRST to hear about the FRC game design from the beginning to now. All right, now it's time to talk about the evolution of game design for the FIRST Robotics Competition. And it always hasn't been the same. There's been quite an evolution. And with us today, we have an expert panel. We've got the brain trust of FIRST all in the same place. People with many years of FIRST experience in game design. And I'll let them introduce themselves. Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Pilot, and I'm the Senior Kit of Parts Manager at FIRST and the team lead for the 2022 Game Design Committee.
Hi, I'm Eric Rasmussen. I'm the Senior Application Software Developer and a former member of the FRC Engineering Department.
Hi, my name is Frank Merrick. I'm the Director of FIRST Robotics Competition.
Hi, I'm Matt Pilot. I'm the Senior Electrical Engineering Manager for FIRST Robotics Competition.
All right, welcome to our stellar crew here. Now let's get into game design. It hasn't always been the same at FIRST. It's evolved over the years. But right now, let's talk about the last 3 to 5 years. How has FIRST changed their game design process over the last year? And then let's work backwards.
So really COVID has so changed kind of how we do this whole process this past year. So virtually everything has gone virtual. So we do a lot of work through platforms like this, whether it's Zoom or Teams, or as a result, we used to sit in a conference room and, draw things out on whiteboards or things like that. But now we've really done a lot more extensive use of whether it's sharing hand drawings that we're doing in notebooks. People are making PowerPoint CAD, or we're sharing actual CAD, actual CAD that people are developing with SolidWorks much earlier in the design process, which is in some ways kind of accelerated some of the pictures that from that might develop in my head, and to be able to translate them to the team, which is great. And as a result, if we do have to go into the office, right, it's masks and social distancing are the name of the game, right? And there's only a handful of people who are there who are actually making making physical prototypes, and even then we're looking at we're evaluating those prototypes and looking at them over a call like this, and trying to kind of extrapolate how a robot might interact with that particular thing, or those sorts of things. So it's definitely different.
And another thing that changed a few years ago was I don't remember how long ago, but it used to be that the game design for the following year started at the championship. The first game design meeting was held the Sunday morning after a championship. But then FIRST needed to get ahead for supply chain reasons and just planning reasons. So how does that happen now? How many games is the game design team working on at once?
Yeah, so like you said, right? I mean, we used to cram everything in that basically into that 6-month period between right after kickoff. But now we've got, now once we kind of got into the 35 plus fields that we had to ship out, now we're up to 40 that we're sending out all around the world. It became too much for our vendors to handle in that 1 to 2 month period of trying to manufacture all this field stuff. It just wasn't working. So our staff had gotten big enough a couple years ago, 3 years ago, maybe at this point, to be able to split into 2 different teams. And we're effectively kind of 2 product development teams working collaboratively, but also independently. So one group will be working on one game and the other group will be working on a second game.
So one thing that just struck me was it takes so many parts to make a game and to supply the game, to manufacture the game. So Kate, you're in charge of kit of parts. How does that affect you in a timeline?
The timeline's been really helpful because if the game design team selects a game piece, we have more time to work with our sourcing team to try to find that game piece or find alternate versions of that game piece that might be less expensive to teams or more available across the planet. And so it's helped a lot. It's also helped us work with other suppliers, like with the drive-based kit, for example, to make sure that what we're shipping in the kit can accommodate the game that's being developed. And so it's provided some flexibility there, and hopefully we're serving the teams better and because of that too.
And Frank, as the director of the program, this must be a huge weight off of your shoulders, not to have that compression of 6 months to actually get a game together. But now let's open the door a little bit and talk about who is actually involved in the game design process.
Sure. So up until about 5 or 6 years ago, the core game design committee was really made up of volunteers, and these volunteers were from several different industries. They were all pretty much selected by Dean, and Dean himself was directly involved, intensely involved in the game design process, as I said, up to probably 5 or 6 years ago. So of course, the staff had to be involved as well because we were the ones that were responsible for taking this vision of the game design committee and making it into something that could actually be manufactured and supported and so forth out in the field during the season. But probably 5 or 6 years ago, we started to evolve more towards having the core game design group be staffers themselves. And as Matt had talked about this, of course, we now have 2 different groups that are working on this. And so this has allowed us to get ahead, and lots of advantages there, as we've already said. So we're not trying to cram all this information or work into such a short period. And although the core game design group is now staffers, we get lots of support from volunteers every year, probably for about the same time period, maybe the last 5 years or so. My memory is terrible. I can't remember exactly. We've had a group of volunteers, our rules review team, that comes in typically fall-ish, in the fall time, actually takes a look at the game manual that we have, the game that we've developed, and maybe by that point it's 80%, 85% complete, and really works to poke holes in it. And once you've looked at any design, I would imagine, whether you're designing a game or designing something, something else, for a while, if you look at it for too long, you start to get sort of blinders on what maybe the weak points or things that you have overlooked. And bringing in those volunteers really helps us, with that fresh set of eyes, really helps us find issues that we need to address. And I can't tell you how much I feel that the process has improved by going to that 2-phase sort of approach: core game design group, staffers; support group, volunteers.
And it wasn't always like this. The balance has shifted a little bit. Now it's primarily, initially, the first staffers. But Kate, it used to be heavily weighted towards volunteers. Most of the voices in the room didn't get a paycheck from FIRST. So can you talk about those days when it was it used to be almost all volunteers?
Yeah, I think way back when, if I understand correctly, it was a group of DECA engineers who were voluntold to help FIRST design some games. And I think Eric and Peter will talk a little bit more about that. But when I started at FIRST in 2006, it was a small group of volunteers, not related to DECA, but I'm pretty sure they were still voluntold by Dean that they were to help FIRST with this game design effort. it was the same in a lot of ways, and it was different in a lot of ways. Definitely different logistical challenges because they were volunteers from all over the country, and we wanted to make sure that when we had everybody together that we were really maximizing the productivity in that time. And so it would be, 4 to 5 weekend sessions when they would all fly into Manchester, and we would just do game design all weekend, really long days from early in the morning to having dinner together, to sometimes more game design happened after dinner, and sometimes a lot of game design happened after dinner. And so it was more mad sprints of productivity over 4 to 5 weekends over that 4 to 5 month period. And then it was the staff's job to not only participate, and the volunteers were inclusive and interested in our thoughts and ideas too, but then in between those sessions to work on the prototypes that they wanted to see and work on the documentation. And then we would have calls in the evenings to talk through progress or information or something we've learned or something that failed, and kind of iterate over the phone, because I don't think we did video calls. I think it was all over the phone. And so now that it's mostly staff, it's a lot easier to have shorter spurts where we meet, a few times a week and iterate over time and iterate together. And so I think that the process of it is pretty different. When we had volunteers, those volunteers had regular day jobs, and they were pretty diverse. That we had people from Hollywood, NASA, Cirque du Soleil, academia, and then there were different FRC roles represented in that group too, mentors and referees. And so that was great.
One question I get all the time, GDC, there was like this crazy code word. I'd be at an event and people would say, so well, who's on the GDC and what's up with the GDC, and the GDC, how do they come up with this game? So we're peeling back the curtain a little bit here. And one question that always came up is like, what does Dean do on the GDC? So can you answer that, Kate? Is Dean still involved, or how has he been involved?
He has not been involved in recent years, and I choose to interpret that as just the most generous compliment a group of people can receive, that he feels that he doesn't need to be. So we're going to run with that. But back in the day when it was, the small group of volunteers, he was very much involved, and he was there all weekend. Maybe not all weekend, maybe he would be there one day of the two, but he was there embedded in the game design process. He understood the dynamics, and he was just as engaged as any of the other members of the team. And so that was personally something I'm really grateful to that experience. Kind of working side by side with Dean in that way was one of the highlights of my job, and something I'll never forget.
And we'd be remiss to not mention Woody too. Woody was heavily involved with game design for many years, and I think he took more of a back seat, more of a review kind of role in the last few years too, hasn't he?
Yeah, and I think Woody's contribution, in addition to the technical aspects of the game and the dynamics of the game and the strategic depth of the game, and kind of driving all those things home, he was also so good at really making sure and challenging the rest of the game design members to make sure that we weren't setting teams up to do something ungracious, or inviting them to be selfish, and that we're really trying to set up the framework in the game to reward the culture that we so strive to achieve.
Woody, I'll say that Woody was excelled at asking questions and genuinely listening to responses. So he wasn't asking questions to, somehow further his own interests. He'd ask questions when he really wanted to know what you thought the answers were.
Sometimes those are tough questions to answer because it was Woody, and you're like, I want to get this right. Or
absolutely, yeah. There was a lot of very, yeah.
Yeah. So what we're hearing is it takes a lot of different kinds of people, a lot of different departments from FIRST involved, a lot of different people outside the building are involved and have been involved. So now we're going to take a step back even further into time and save our special wizard here for last. There's the longest serving staff member at FIRST is Eric Rasmussen. And Eric was around way back when, first as a mentor on a team, and then he started working for FIRST, and he was involved in some of the original game design. Eric, take it away. What was it like back in the day?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I started in 94 in preparation for 95. And I participated starting in 92 as a mentor. And in the early game designs that I experienced and what I was told about what had happened before, it was pretty much Dean and Woody were like the ringleaders. And they were supported by a large number of engineers from DECA who would volunteer their time. And also a person that was Dean's master carpenter who would do a lot of work on his houses and things like that. And that guy was a fantastic woodworker, which is why all the early playing field elements were made out of wood instead of metal and PVC that we see or whatever today. So they would get together and they would go through all sorts of crazy ideas, because it was essentially a blank slate at the beginning. We were figuring out still what makes sense and what works and what's what plays well. So they would meet maybe weekly in a room in the basement of the DECA building, which is actually not unlike the kit room that we have now in FIRST headquarters. So it's a big room, lots of room to build prototypes, old brickwork from the mill building and things like that, and no exterior windows so that we don't let the game secrets out. And everything was in person, and people would show up from DECA. Woody would drive up from Boston, and we'd sit around and we'd come up with all sorts of ideas. And it was really interesting to watch the dynamic between Dean and Woody, because they would each one would come up with some exceptional idea, and the other one kind of would like counter it a little bit, right? So there was a little bit of, reining things in that way. And then just what I imagine goes on now, which is a lot of prototyping, right? Okay, we're going to build these field elements. We're going to go look into these game pieces. Do they have the right dynamics when robots or people are throwing them around or whatever? And so a lot of iteration, and a tremendous amount of lessons learned over the first few years too. The things that we don't do today that we seemed like a good idea at the time. The very first year, the game object was a tennis ball, and they would put a whole bunch of tennis balls close together, and the robots would go in and pick them up and then carry them around inside the robots. And that's great if you're standing right next to the playing field. You can tell everything that's going on. But if your grandma sitting in the bleachers trying to tell what's going on 100 feet away, you have no idea, because you can't even see the individual, units of game scoring at that point. So visibility was one object. We used to have also teams would stand around every side of the playing field, blocking the audience view, right? That was another thing. There's so many things. And as the years went on, the robots would get bigger and bigger because we got more powerful motors. We could do more things. Let's make it more visible. Well, then the mentors started having back problems picking them up. So we had to say, okay, that's too much.
So as FIRST game design has evolved, I think what I'm hearing from everybody is there's, you need to evolve with it. So as things grow, as teams grow, this year with the game design challenge, I think it's this great opportunity for teams to finally wear the shoes that happen inside FIRST every day, because we often hear game should have been this and it should have been this, and they could have done that. So what are some of the let's just round table here, what are some of the most important things that this group thinks should be involved in game design? Like, what should these teams be thinking about based with all your years of experience?
I would say very important to design. One of the top things that we always look for is very important to design both for rookies, that may just have a box spot out there, be able to drive base driving around, and veterans, 20+ year veterans that, you may frequently have the kind of the best records in FRC. So that's one of our big challenges, is how do you design a game that is interesting to both? We're the only sport, then maybe there are others, but we're the only sport where I know you have absolute rookie teams on the same field with great performing veteran teams that have been at this for a long time. So designing for both those groups, I think, is really important.
Anybody else?
Yeah, sure. So one of the aspects of game designs that we didn't always get right early on was the complexity of the scoring. And so, you know, as engineers, we all thought, hey, let's, you know, it's all fair game, right? If we come up with some crazy, you know, algorithmic equation or something like that, and that's how you score points, whatever, it's all fun. But it turns out that grandma and parents and others who aren't like, you know, intimately involved in the rules, they don't understand that when they're watching from the audience. And so they don't understand what it is that their, you know, relatives are doing and why they should celebrate it. And they, you know, they can't tell from a distance quickly, you know, who's winning.
This year when we were filming Dean for the kickoff, he actually said, we still haven't gotten it right. The scoring and audience like understanding it easily. So like that's been like, I've been trying from year 0 to make that happen, but we still haven't really like knocked it out of the park yet. But
there's so many, that's absolutely a major challenge. As Eric was saying, you know, you at some point you want to have, because if a top alliance gets out there and can just run away with the game, it's very simple to understand that if all you're doing is putting balls in an opening and how each ball is worth 1 point or something, super easy to understand, but not the greatest experience maybe for the other alliance that maybe has, you know, a couple rookies with them and they're just really struggling. So at the end of the day, we want really all the teams that leave an event, we want them to have a positive experience no matter where they happen to be ranked on the robot scores.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The idea of wanting the scoring to be simple, but also introducing a depth of strategy into the game that makes things interesting, but also doesn't result in or creates a game where there are going to be a lot of different solutions, right? And not one obvious solution of a style of robot or a mechanism or whatever that will do well. Those things are challenging.
Yeah, and no matter what you do in terms of how convinced you are that your idea is a great game design, make sure you test it or bounce it off other people's ideas of how they would approach the solution to that, because they will outwit you and they will find ways to do things that you'd never imagined. And if you don't get that right, then the game isn't a good game. And then you maybe have to course correct the rules mid-season after mechanisms have been designed. And it's not a good experience like that. We had one year where teams figured out how to score points way faster than we expected. And we had like a sound effect on the real-time scoring system that took longer to play than it took for a team to make a score. So like we had this like timing deficit of mashing the buttons to keep the score up to date, and the teams are just nailing it. So, you know, you gotta never trust your own solutions to be the only ones that will solve the problem.
I want to pick up on a point that Frank mentioned earlier about kind of having that really high ceiling and the low floor and the wide walls to be inclusive of a wide variety of teams we have. And I think part of that, diving into that in terms of it, maybe it's a nuance, maybe not, but designing a game where it's not easier for a robot to undo what another robot has done. And so I think that there's sometimes criticism for how FRC games are anti-defense. Well, we're not anti-defense. It's much more about, this was a really hard thing to do. This took a team a lot of time, energy, effort, and thought to move that game piece from point A to point B. And for another team to just bash into it and undo that hard work is something that when the first team gets on the bus at the end of the day to go home, they're not feeling great. And so kind of making sure that the really hard stuff is rewarded and the easy stuff is rewarded appropriately. Defense is still important, but it's not a game breaker. It's not a day maker. It's not a day breaker. It's just it's there. It's part of the game, but really making sure that those trade-offs happen appropriately, fairly, in a way that when both teams get on the bus to go home, they're proud of what they did that day.
That's also true. That's a really great point, by the way, Kate. And one of the other things that's important on is the way that the field itself, the field elements are constructed, where, for example, if you're sending a robot up onto a ramp and now it's 2, 3, or whatever feet above the height of the rest of the playing field, you want to make sure that if that robot, you know, slips off the ramp, that it's not a 3-foot drop where now their machine is broken and they don't just lose the match. They could be out for half the event. while they're repairing it, you want to make sure that there's, that there's a smooth transition in certain ways like that. And also the robot to robot interaction rules. Maybe it's tame when robots can't beat each other up, but that's how you allow the team to have match after match of experience. So, early on, we allowed teams to have flippers where they could literally upend another robot. And it was very exciting until somebody's 10-foot tall robot came crashing down. So I got one more thing, which is make sure that your rules are enforceable. Because if everything's a judgment call and it's left up to the referees, then you get all sorts of different experiences for different teams. People feel like they weren't treated fairly. Anything that's very, just quantifiable, like there's a ball in the goal, that's the kind of thing you want.
Yeah, great point. All right. Great session, everybody. Thank you. Eric, thank you. Voice of history. Frank, doing a great job running the program.
Thank you,
Matt
Blair.
and Kate, thank you. Doing electronics and software, and Kate, the kit parts. This is a really, really great team, people. But now we're going to move on to, well, we have to start somewhere when we start thinking about a game. Where does it all begin? What's the egg that gets hatched? And to walk us through that, we have Danny Diaz. Danny.
All right, thanks, Blair. Today, my name is Danny Diaz. I'm a systems engineer with FRC, and today we're talking about that starter concept because, like Blair said, you got to start somewhere. Now, this starter concept isn't the game design process, not the full design process. This is just to get that seed, that starter of the game idea, and to help refine it a little bit before you actually start your full game design process. Now, during this process, it's very important that you bring everybody to the table. Now, game design by its very nature is a very collaborative process. You really need as many people from as many various backgrounds that you can possibly get into that room. It really helps with just looking at perspectives that most of the people in the room may not have had or may not have considered when they're going through the game design process. Now, this is a process-heavy kind of presentation. It's 5 minutes, so don't worry so much. But this is a process that's a very linear process. It'll seem like it kind of comes back onto itself, but it's a very linear process. So when you come back through this video, later when it's posted to Twitch, you're going to come back and see this, and this will help you kind of go through the process that we're going to talk about here. Now, it seems like we're doing everything in the first step, but we're not. This is actually just starting that initial seed. We're not planting the seed yet. This is the initial seed. You're actually doing individual or sometimes small group brainstorming. This is where you'll choose a topic or some kind of a theme. You could say, oh, I've got a great idea for a medieval type game, or I've got a great idea for a steampunk type game, or hey, how about a video game? And so then you'll take your idea and some game mechanics that you have with it, and you'll put it into a template. Now, this template really is for presentation, for having the same level playing field for everybody else when they go to look at this. What you don't want to end up having is the movie of the game in everybody's head to be differently. And so this allows everyone to have the same basis for looking at your game. Because remember, great games presented poorly generally don't succeed, and a poor game that's presented amazing, well, you don't want that to actually get through. So once you have those initial seeds, we usually have about 6 to 12. We get up to 12 of these seeds. Then we assign a champion. Now, this champion is just an advocate for the concept. And so you need to have somebody who's going to present this idea to the group, or answer some simple questions about the concept, or help facilitate changes as the changes are going to happen throughout this starter process. Now, remember that this champion is also somebody who may eventually have to save this idea for another season. Only about 3 to 4 of these concepts are going to get through the first part of this process. So step 2 is actually deciding which 3 or 4 ideas are going to move through the process. And we do that by presenting the ideas to the entire group. Sometimes we have up to 25 people who are in this initial game design starter group. And so we'll present those ideas, and then they'll vote on which ideas will actually move forward. Now, realize that you're not, culling the herd. You're actually looking at this like, hey, there's a huge array of really great ideas, and any one of those ideas by themselves may be the greatest idea that anybody's ever had. But what we're really trying to do is take those, top 3 or 4 ideas, the best of the best of the best, and push those forward. So don't feel bad if your idea gets chopped, and don't feel bad if you have to come back another season and do this all over again with your idea. Then what we do, once we have our 3 to 4 game ideas, we then form refinement teams. And this is where, bringing everybody to the table is a huge plus, because you sort of break the entire group up into these refinement teams based on their backgrounds. And that the hats and glasses activity will really help you decide, sort of who those backgrounds are. And those refinement teams then get assigned to a concept. Now, don't worry, you're not stuck in that concept, but what you do is you help refine that concept that you're in. And then once 45 minutes or an hour or whatever time you decide is up, then everybody gets up and moves to the left, and then works on the next game idea. And you keep doing that. And what the refinement teams do is they keep building on the ideas and the directions that previous groups have gone on. And they also introduce new ideas. They introduce, new issues or new possibilities for that game design. Now, once the refinement teams are done providing all the feedback, then each of the champions get up and present all the feedback for each game to the whole attendees. It's very important that the attendees understand, what the game is, how the evolution is, and really this sort of sets them up to be able to do a thinking hats process. Now, this is Edward de Bono's thinking hats process and the converging and the game activities. This really helps us to figure out what insights people have about the game, what they like, what they don't like, what maybe is going to be an issue for them voting later on. Okay, so next, we then all sort of decide which game ideas we like the best. And then we get to create new teams. These are the final concept teams, new teams to work on these ideas. Now, not everybody can work on the same idea, so you may have to pick the second favorite that you have. But everybody then joins up with their favorite game idea and refines that idea. Now, these really should be done in good faith. This isn't the time to actually take a previous idea and then turn, one of this game into that previous idea. You're trying to develop the game concept that you currently have in front of you, and you're trying to bring in as many considerations from the thinking hats ideas that have come up, and you're trying to address as many of the issues, or even either holes, or trying to refine it as much as possible, because then we all get together and the champions will present the game ideas as a whole to everybody, and then you vote again. It sort of sounds like step number 2, but this is actually the last step, to vote to figure out which idea is the best. Now, all 4 ideas are probably going to be just absolutely stunning. And what we typically do for these is we'll take the top 2 and put them into our group of ideas, and then save them for later. So you can decide to share these with other people if you want, but we don't want everybody working on the same game design. So some quick final thoughts. Game design really is, like I've said, the embodiment of cooperation, right? Everybody wants their concept to win, but at the same time, everybody wants the very best game. Make sure that through this process, you're constructive in your criticism, right? Always go after the positives in the games, and try to figure out how you can best promote the ideas behind the concepts. Though there's no right or wrong way for doing game design, but this is how FRC does it. Blair?
thanks, Danny. Great job. And as Danny mentioned, there is no right or wrong way to brainstorm concepts. This is just how we do it. You might have your own process. We're just putting a lot of options out there so you can find your best path. Now, Danny also spoke about converging, and we have an activity called converging. It provides techniques for developing ideas generated by brainstorming and then converging on an idea to move it forward. It's very helpful in coming up with a starting point. And we have another activity called developing a game using a specific idea. Now, this activity is designed to help teams who have a specific idea for a game piece, a game mechanic, a robot action, or a human player action, but are not sure how to move it forward. Once you have a starting point, this activity can help you develop out your ideas. Okay, now it's time to get very specific. And we will take you behind the doors of our GDC. We'll look into the development behind the FRC games from the last 3 years. And we'll start with the 2018 game Power Up, presented by one of our engineers and game design team members, Amanda Bissett.
Sorry about that. Was muted. Hi, I'm Amanda, and here to talk about Power Up. I'm a systems engineer for FRC. So let's start by the beginning. This game was started right after championships in 2017. So we were coming off of Steamworks. This was the first game of the 2-year game design cycle, but being the first year, it was still developed in that 1-year time period. This was also the first year prior to themes, so we really had a clean slate when starting this game. Looking from prior years, we'd set out some game goals of simple assembly. We wanted more of a pick and place game because the prior years had more of a shooting in them, as well as highly incentivizing auto. We wanted auto to be incentivized more than just to challenge teams and get them to really compete auto, but auto's a really visual part of the game. And it's really exciting to see robots move as soon as the bells go off instead of just seeing static robots. So we really wanted to incentivize auto and see robots moving. We started with theme, since this was the final year before FIRST started cross-program themes. We really went into brainstorming of kind of what was current, what was big, and we really worked with Disney and Joey and Joe kind of helping us go through like where did we want to set this game for the storyline. So we went through many different ideas and brainstorms, and we kind of came through these top ideas of Minecraft, kind of 8-bit, water collection, circuit board completion, and horse racing. Very kind of different ideas, but looking through really what was big, and Minecraft was really big in the time, and Ready Player One was coming out in the spring, we really went with the 8-bit theming for the game. So while we were developing theme, we were developing that game hand in hand. So here you can see an image that's about halfway through the process. So we took those initial scales and raised the middle one up and lowered the two on the side to kind of create that hard goal, easy goal. The game design team also, to add more into that, added a human player activity with the vault, which we'll get into talking about later. Added an end game, similar to the 2007 style of robots kind of working together and picking themselves up, as well as changing the scoring so that it wasn't just per game piece placed, but also by the time that the scales were owned. So Okay, let's talk about how the match play of 2018 went out. After the match was randomized by the field, Autonomous started with robots having 1 power cube, and they would take those power cubes and either score them in their switches on the scales, or they would cross that auto line. The auto line being a very traditional auto objective that we have. Along with that, to highly incentivize that auto, if both the switch was owned and all robots crossed the auto line of the Alliance earned a ranking point before they even made it to Teleop. So, moving on to Teleop, robots would continue to gain ownership of their switches and scales and hold them for as long as possible. Human players could now activate power-ups and really play and see what the alliances were going to get with each other to have the highest score by the end. As we jumped into the end game, robots would climb the scale, and all 3 needed to be elevated above the line. They could do this by, activating a power-up or figuring out how to work together. We specifically designed the rung that the robots hung off of to be intentionally small, so robots really had to work together to figure out, either by picking each other up with the hanging. Sometimes robots would play the power-ups for themselves, since they wouldn't actually lift above the line, and raise their other 2 alliance partners. Power-ups. Power-ups are definitely one of my favorite parts of this game. It added the strategic depth to that simple kind of just scales being on the field. This really allowed the human player to interact and be almost as key as an element of the game as the robots. We spent a lot of time brainstorming of lots of different power-ups. We had power-ups that would fog up the audience display, or freeze the robots in place, maybe freeze scoring, force scoring. So you can see in these pictures how we started the brainstorm. It was really kind of messy, all over the place. We actually tried sorting the power-ups into different sections, so they would kind of rotate through, similar to 2016 defenses did. And maybe there'd be an audience chosen one. There'd be ones that stayed all the time, like for the end game. Ones that switched every round of matches. But through a lot of help with internal and external reviews and talking, we simplified it down to just 3 power-ups. We had Force, Levitate, and Boost. That Levitate was that end game power-up, and Force and Boost could be played at different levels, either to force a switcher scale to be owned by you, or boost the amount of points you were earning, depending on how many cubes you played with, which lets us lead into talking about the vault. The vault is definitely one of my favorite pieces of that field. It could tell how many cubes were located inside of it, and then allowed the human players to activate those game pieces activate the power-ups as they decided to. It was really on the human players to activate at the right time, to make sure the field they were either owning the switcher scale if they were going to boost it, or if they were close to owning it, maybe to force the own while they were getting the last few game pieces on, and triggering at different levels. So it really added that strategic component that the humans were involved with the game. Some key developments and iterations this design team went through. We really liked to have randomization in this field. There's randomizations on the plates at the beginning of the match, and we really wanted to have these game pieces be in a random place at the beginning of auto. So our idea was to have poppers on the middle of the scale that would explode at the beginning of every match. You probably saw a clip of this in the kickoff video, some of the behind the scenes footage. But as we were going through the testing with the cubes, and we had foam cubes and solid and heavy cubes, when we eventually settled on the milk crates with the covers for cost and durability of reasons, it really didn't make sense safety-wise to have these pieces exploding up and off the floor. So we had to remove that from our game. But I think it was still exciting without. Another key field development, it was making sure that everyone was able to play the game. Initially, we wanted, robots without manipulators to be able to just push the cubes into the switches, be able to score there. But those ramps were really, really big. We wanted not only did they work for like robots without manipulators, but we wanted to make sure that the standard kitbot wouldn't get stuck on them. So these ramps added a lot of congestion onto the field. So we worked with ways to remove them down so you wouldn't need them. The loading station was reconfigured so human players could put the game pieces at a height higher than the switches were for robots, as well as scoring into the vault counted for points. So even if the robot was just delivering cubes to their human players, they were still scoring points for their alliance. Some out-of-the-box thinking for this game. We had avatars were started in 2018 as a way for the teams to continue their imagery on the audience display. Teams submitted, and it was changed every match, so you now had more than just your team number and really fit into that 8-bit theming we were going around. Null zones were these dynamic protection zones. Typically when we put zones down with red or blue tape, but with the field being randomized at the start of every match, we couldn't just put red or blue tape down for that to work. So the field really was dependent, and those protection zones were dependent on the colors of the plates of that match. With the randomization and for robots to know what they should do in auto, robots were actually receiving game data right at the start of the match so that they could choose which auto to run, whether they're going to score on the switch or the scale, or they were just going to run across the line, to really work on getting that auto ranking point, which encouraged more auto participation and saw more collaboration between teams working together in each alliance to make sure you could complete that ranking point together. Another kind of out-of-the-box thing was that the switch and scale earned the same number of points for ownership. Even though one was taller, one was shorter, they still were same quantity of points, but the only difference being that the scale could be owned by either alliance and only you could own your switch. So last little tips I want to leave you with is, out-of-the-box thinking can really make a great game experience, and iteration is your friend.
Thanks, Amanda. And what a great example of how gameplay preceded theme. And thanks for removing the exploding milk crates all over the field as well. We're all safer now. Now let's go behind the scenes of the popular 2019 game, Destination Deep Space. And with us back once again, downtown Danny Diaz.
Hi, thanks, Blair. This is 2019 game design. I was fortunate enough to be able to help facilitate this particular game, so it has a special place in my heart. 2019 was a great season for game design. We had just started. It was the very first year of the cross-program theme, so very early we had a theme that we could work off of, space. And so we went through our pool of games. We have the starter concepts, and then we pulled the starter concept. It actually was build a goal. So actually here on the right-hand side of the screen is a snippet of the template that we had, the normal our game design template starter bit that you saw previously for build a goal. And we eventually called it build a rocket because, hey, we were building rockets. And so in 2019, the primary elements were rocket structures on the field. You then have these rocket frames that you then place over the structures to actually build your goal, and then you score game pieces into that goal. It was a very simple concept, and it was intended to be a very simple game. early on in the game design process, we realized that everybody had different pictures in their heads for different ideas and concepts that we were tossing around. So Jasmine Florentine, who's a fantastic artist, decided to start doing little drawings that would help us stay in focus, but also help explain a lot of the mechanical concepts that she had for a lot of the things that we were talking about, and a lot of the things that we were trying to come up with for the frame construction, or what should the rocket goals be like, or what kind of game pieces can we have, and how does that impact the game. So when you're doing your game design, being able to have these images, we previously had talked about taking CADs or drawings. It doesn't even have to be look this beautiful or professional, but it could certainly be just drawings on a piece of paper that helps everyone keep the frame of the game in mind as you're working through. Now, once we actually got our game and we started brainstorming kind of how we knew we were going to have rockets, and so we started saying, well, what kind of a game are we going to have? Because the number of rockets that we have on the field, or the types of rockets, is all going to be eventually, you're going to make or break it based upon whatever kind of strategic analysis or strategy that you have on the field. So we started this analysis process to just try to figure out, like, what kind of a game do we want to have? Maybe we don't have all the answers, but let's try to come up with a few. And so we started looking at different ways that the games could play out, different ways that scoring could happen. And eventually we kind of realized that we all have a different idea of what we're doing during the game, or we didn't have a clear view of what we were doing. So we just kind of stopped for a second, went back and listened to all the stories and the lessons that we've gotten from Joey in the past. And we said, you know what, let's go ahead and create stories. So let's do a top-down sort of game design. So we stepped back and said, let's develop the story so we can drive the gameplay. Because at the time, really, the game mechanics, the rockets, were driving the story and the gameplay, and it wasn't working out. So we started just a list of, here are the overall game objectives of the game. And so we started listing those game objectives. Then we had big, sheets of paper that tried to flesh out those specific game objectives. And we put the game objectives out, and then we put in red all the questions that we had. How many game pieces are we going to have? What's the color of the game pieces? What's the color of the rockets? Do the rockets move around? And so we tried to at least identify all the stuff that we eventually had to answer. Some of them we could answer right there, but the vast majority of them we just didn't know, and we didn't want to take the time to do that quite yet. And then we built a story. That was probably one of the coolest aspects of it. We actually built a running story, and the answers that we didn't have, we put a blank, and then tried to fill out as much of the story as possible. And that helped us. That kept everybody in tune with where we currently were, what we were trying to work towards, and just really, when we were trying to come up with new ideas, we said, well, how does that work into the story? Or like what Joey and Joe were saying, how do we modify the story in order to make this work? And so it became, once we had those objectives, and we started, realizing, yeah, we're going to have all these game pieces on the field. We're going to have all these, rocket frames on the field, plus the rocket structures themselves, and then maybe even an in-game structure. Wow, we got a lot of field congestion. And so some of the elements that we tried to do to reduce field congestion were the panels. Now, the panels were also a little bit of, how do we ship these things? How do we allow teams to be able to recreate these in their own shops? Things that you have to eventually come up with and think about really helped with this. And you saw in the previous picture, there was a volcano, and that's how cargo would arrive on the field, because, you're on an alien world and minerals come out of volcanoes, but why not, right? So anyway, then we started talking about rockets. Rockets was another thing that took up space on the field, but how many rockets were there? And do we have a cooperation rocket? We love cooperation as much as we possibly can. And then, of course, the in-game structure. I think that that picture there of the in-game structure was actually the first original in-game structure. We called that the Sphinx because it kind of looks like an Egyptian Sphinx. And we had Jasmine's artist rendition of how robots could help each other climb that in-game structure. And, you know, we really tried our best to get the cargo right, you know, the game piece that you'd be scoring. And we ended up getting stymied by the same exact thing that teams get stymied by at the very beginning of trying to figure out how to solve the game piece. And that's just issues with the game piece itself. Those balls that we had were just so frictiony with each other, and they wouldn't move the way we wanted. The way we wanted those things was so that we would have these big rockets, and then you'd put, you know, you put the panels onto the rockets to hold the game pieces in. You put the game pieces inside, and if one of the panels happens to get removed or wasn't, you know, on tight enough, then all the game pieces above it would come flooding out of the rocket. Well, that didn't actually happen. You remove the game piece, and because of all the friction of, you know, between the balls and between the rocket, nothing would move. And we're like, no, well, maybe it's a problem with the way that we built the structure. Maybe it's a geometry problem. Maybe it's a wood problem. And when we go to metal, you know, everything's going to solve itself. We didn't really put enough, maybe we didn't put enough effort into really trying to solve that problem. And that was something that we had to eventually solve later with the cat, we called it the cat hotel. The cat hotel solution, which is there on the right-hand side. But, you know, cargo, the game piece is something you really have to think about. You know, do you want high bounce, low bounce when it comes to balls? Do you want it to be fragile? Initially, we had balloons or beach balls as the potential game piece. And then, like, we eventually scrapped that when Dean told us to scrap it. Because we would just wanted to make sure that you couldn't pop somebody else's game piece. And so we developed the game and got to some point, you know, it was the first year. We had a 2-year process. And so we came up to the end of the first year and said, okay, we've got a game and it's pretty playable, but it's lacking something, you know, it's lacking that wow factor. Because, you know, we had just got off of humans on the airships, you know, in the 2017, because we were still in the, you know, the 2018 design phase here. You know, we didn't have humans on airships. We didn't have, you know, the cool teeter-totters in the game. We didn't have Amanda's, you know, great power-ups, you know. What do we do? And we did this huge brainstorming activity, and we ended up coming up with blinded drivers. Now, you'll have to thank me because it was either blinded drivers or space bees. So let's just leave it there. So we had the blinded drivers. And so the blinded drivers, it was just trying to find a way to, you know, make it so that at some point in time, the drivers couldn't see what was going on. And that was great because, you know, eventually in auto, we, you know, were able to let all teams be able to participate during the hybrid period at some point. You know, it's really bad when a game starts up and nobody moves on the field. But, you know, not everybody liked that idea. It was up to the game design team to kind of push on being able to have that in the game. One of the things we also had to throw out of the game was rockets raising. So we initially had this idea of rockets being able, you know, we had these instead of cargo ships, we had these horizontal rockets that we would score into, and then at the end of the game, they would raise up. But we really couldn't find a good balance of gameplay versus mechanical design, because the mechanical team said, no, if a robot gets stuck on that and we try to lift a robot up into the air, that's just going to be bad news for everybody. So we ended up having to scrap that and went with the cargo ships. So the last bit here is really trying to design the field to be able to limit the degrees of freedom necessary in order to play the game. You know, we can have a simple field, but require complex robots. We much prefer to have you know, put the complexity on the field rather than the robots. So there were a lot of things that we did in order to make it easier for robots of all skill levels to be able to play the game. And you didn't have to have this really complex robot in order to do something that looks simple. You know, it's that whole, you know, looks easy is hard kind of thing. That's sort of what it turned into very quickly. So we sort of turned it around and tried to, make it look medium, and it was kind of medium. And we also really liked our, external review process. We had Boeing, right? They were our first season sponsor, and they really helped with the nomenclature around space travel and helped us kind of frame our rocket designs. We were thinking futuristic or retro sci-fi, and they kind of pulled us back into more present day. And they say that our rockets look a lot like the Phantom Express, the Boeing Phantom Express, and we're like, hey, look at that. I wonder why. And of course, the external review team were huge in helping us out. And one of the things I want to push here is that we initially were just going to have a clear polycarbonate panel, and the review team said, no, you're going to have something that looks good, because I want one of these on my wall and I want it to look good. So just really quick, some final thoughts. Communication is incredibly key. It helps everybody stay on point, and the story elements really helped with that. Through our process, our game structures changed way significantly. Fail quick, fail often, and really try to push for an easily explainable game. We can't say this enough. The easily explainable game is probably the number one thing that you need to make sure, because you need to be able to look and say who's ahead. You need to be able to understand the way that it is, and grandma has to be able to watch this game too. All right, so that was 2019 Destination Deep Space.
Thanks, Danny. An interesting and different approach than Power Up, strongly driven by theme and story. And I think you put the challenge out there to teams this year in their game designs as incorporate space bees. All right, a reminder that if you have a game design question, please submit them in the chat and we'll be answering them in our final segment. Now it's time to move on to a game that you are all very familiar with, Infinite Recharge. And here to present is FRC engineer and game design team member, Matt Pilot.
Thanks a lot, Blair. So with Infinite Recharge, right, this is a game that, of course, everyone is, like you said, very familiar with. But where we started with Infinite Recharge is definitely different than where we ended up. So, we can start here. Everybody's fully, very familiar with how the field looks in Infinite Recharge. But if we kind of take a look at where we began, the world is very different. So, so coming off of the championship in 2018 is when we really started kind of working with this game, and at that time the overall theme that we were working with first wide was architecture, which is there's a lot of fantastic features about architecture, about buildings and bridges and arches and really cool large scale things like that. But one of the challenges about architecture is that many of those things are static. So we were kind of really trying to think about, well, how do we create a game that is, it has movement in it with a theme that is kind of evokes a lot of kind of initial ideas about things that are big and stand still. So in this game, in the concept for this game kind of started with these three with this large ramp in the middle of the field, and these goals that were framed by these thin bars. So the idea was you could score game pieces into basically by pushing or shooting like a ball through like the gap between the bars into these goals on top of this ramp. And there was also some smaller mobile goals that could be moved around the field that could also be scored in. And then one of the end game challenges was to take these larger balls that were in the corners of the field and place them on top of either the mobile goal or the goals in the center of the field. And that would be like a point doubler, or it would add more value. So we were, but we really felt strongly on the team that was doing this development that we wanted to incorporate a game that included shooting game pieces, because in 2018 and 2019 those games were more limited in terms of that kind of thing. And kind of another part of this another part of this theme that really inspired us was this image that kind of in the lower left here about where you could stack and kind of create like a building or a structure kind of with smaller game pieces. But we were also we liked that, but we were also a little sensitive to it because that felt really similar to what we knew the 2019 team was developing at the time. So we were we were kind of at a challenging spot kind of at that point, but we moved forward with it. So from there, game development over the summer of 2018, the game evolved into this field that you see here. So one of the things that you might remember from Amanda's concept for the 2018 game is that field had angular positioned player stations in the corners, but ultimately in that game we decided not to use them. But we did pull that into this game because it was something that the team really liked. We were also really interested in, or we were inspired by like a skee ball style goal. So that ended up it was the inspiration for ultimately what became the power port. But you can see that our the perimeter of our field and the position of our goals are pretty much what we ended up with in power up. In infinite recharge. We expanded and kind of changed the ramp in the middle of the field slightly to kind of what's shown in this design. One of the things that we really liked about that was the kind of the extensions off of the sides of the ramp that went towards the field borders here, and that kind of evoked this cool idea of robots being able to be in the same kind of area of the field, but at different levels. So a robot basically driving underneath where another robot is driving. That was a really exciting thing for us. So we had this big ramp. We knew that it was a big obstacle. We really liked that we had some areas of protection kind of over in these lanes on the left and the right with the red and blue lanes and the wings with the game pieces. So all of these things were incorporated, and we felt pretty confident and really liked kind of the way that and the direction we were going with this game as we approached kind of the end of 2018. But excuse me, we paused at that point, and everybody changes their focus and to the 2018 season. So we're packing trucks and getting everything ready to go out on the road and support the season and actually doing all that stuff. So excuse me, in between kind of the pause period at the end of 2018 and when we returned in 2019, something really exciting happened, which was Star Wars Force for Change partnered with FIRST. And that was awesome. Like, that really changed our perspective on the game. And we not all of a sudden we had access to the IP with from Star Wars, so droids and the symbols of the Republic and the Empire and these sort of things. So we started Joey and Joe talked more about the story stuff earlier in our thing today, and so we really dove into what are some of the iconic images of that in Star Wars, and things that really resonated for us were things like the shape of the thermal exhaust board of the Death Star, and if you look at that shape, it's very similar to the shape that we ended up with that surrounds the high goal in the power port. So that was cool. And the other thing that was really compelling to us was the data port interface that R2 has, and that shows up fairly often in The Empire Strikes Back, where the R2 interfaces with that data port. There's a rotation component of that interface, and he eventually uses that to unlock the door and allows them to escape from Cloud City. So those things really resonated with us, and we took those to heart. So from a field design perspective, the perimeter, as you can see here, is very similar to where we ended up, right? And to our earlier design, right? The angled corners, the power port was the same. The ramp structure is still here, but we knew that story component of this game now kind of had evolved into protection of First City, and this idea of the dome evoked the idea of kind of some energy shield that was protecting First City. So if you want to know more about that, definitely go watch my other video, the game design insights video, where I talk a lot more about how we evolved, specifically the design of the shield generator, which I think everybody will find also really interesting. So we had these new game challenges, right? So and we had this new theme. We had the Star Wars components. So we started exploring these ideas in more detail. The shield generator we knew that we had a shield, which meant that, well, if we have a shield, we probably want to turn it on in order to protect the First City. So that's the idea of the generator switch, and we started brainstorming ideas about what that generator switch would look like. We knew we wanted it to have a hanging element. The loading stations we hadn't really talked about much when we were originally dealing with the concept. So we started playing around with different ideas for how would the balls come out of the loading station and onto the field. And then the data port and the database with R2, that's what really brought us into the idea of the control panel. So we started playing with concepts for how would the control panel work, what would the colors be, how many colors would there be, how big would it be, like all of those things. And then next up, we started with a prototype. We really dove into the prototyping for the field. So we've got some images here of one of the early designs of the generator switch itself. And we started playing with, well, how could we make the structure of the shield generator look really cool? So we played a lot with lighting. We thought a lot about kind of the movement of the generator switch and how far would it move. And the math told us, based on the size of the structure, that robots could end up at the end of the game maybe 10 or 12 feet in the air. Is that too scary? Was there a safety concern there? So that played into a lot of our thinking. And then this other image here, it was some early ideas we had of protection zones around the shield generator, and we knew we wanted teams to have a safe place to be able to shoot into the power port, but we spent a lot of time thinking about how big should those zones be, how much protection is too much, because we still want to. There's all these complications about protection zones and being able to kind of consistently referee those things and still allowing teams to be able to play defense. So a lot of that kind of evolved, and we were talking about this process. One cool thing that we do is we think a lot about the what people can see when they're standing in the player station. So this is another iteration of the design of the playing field. So the shield generator here is really starting to take shape, but these images here show what is blocked and what you can still see when you're in the player stations. So these kind of understand without actually having a field, if you were in kind of the far player stations, corner position, how much of the field can you not see, in terms of, like, is that a problem for a team that can't see their robot, or is that an interesting challenge? A team will then need to incorporate a camera, and we like that. So we balance those challenges often. All right. So new elements that we really were excited to introduce into the game for Infinite Recharge. The multi-robot dynamic hanging element of the generator switch was something that was very exciting to us. The control panel allowed us to integrate two challenges into one element. Excuse me, from the rotation and the position control, which we really liked, and then by moving the player stations to the corners, you were no longer adjacent to your alliance partners, immediately adjacent anyway. So that kind of introduced a little bit of more of a challenge to how teams would communicate with their alliance partners each match. So anyway, so that is where I am and where I finished up with where we ended up with Infinite Recharge. So I think we're back to you, Blair.
Thanks, Matt. Another interesting example that there are many approaches to game design, and sometimes you just might have to change course midstream to really hit the target. And we're really thankful, I think the teams are really thankful that the robots did not end up 12 feet in the air hanging from the switch. There's another game design activity called FIRST Game Design Insights. Matt mentioned it. It's his video. It's really super cool. It provides insight into one way that the FRC game designers go about evolving a single game element from concept to final design. And as Matt said, it's about the evolution of the shield generator. It's also on the FRC YouTube channel as well. I'm going to bring Matt back because although we released nearly the same game as 2020, the game design team made some minor changes for the 2021 season. Matt, what changed and why for this season?
Yeah, we did. So we didn't want to tweak too much, but we looked at kind of the performance and what was happening kind of over those couple weeks that of events that we did have. And one of the things that we were really excited about as part of the game design process was the control panel, and we were really excited to see how teams would integrate with it or interface with it. But we really didn't see a lot of that in the season, and so as a result, we tweaked kind of the value of that element to hopefully increase the use of it, and then we also kind of changed the thresholds for the capacity levels on the field, so that way the balls that need to be scored in order to reach the point where a team would then want to go and be able to go and use the control panel was also kind of potentially sooner in the match. So those were two kind of I think most significant ones that we really looked at, and we wanted to emphasize, and not emphasize, maybe that's not the right word, but give a little bit more incentive to teams to want to use those other game elements.
Great, thanks. And I want to emphasize that we all really, 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 really want to play Infinite Recharge in the 2021 season. We missed the
Absolutely.
Event. All right.
Yes, absolutely.
Matt, we're going to move on. Thanks a lot for your presentation and for updating us on the 2021 game. Now, one of the really cool pieces of the whole game design package and our storytelling package of, each year at the kickoff, it's the game animation. And there are many ways to communicate your game's story, but animation is one of the strongest forms, one of the strongest tools that we use. Before we move on to hear about game design from First LEGO League and First Tech Challenge, here's a really cool video on how the yearly game animation gets created by our friends at Automation Direct.
Automation Direct loves creating the annual FIRST Robotics Competition game animation. We get questions about the process, so let's take a peek behind the curtain and see how it all comes together. We usually start in August before kickoff, brainstorming with FIRST, giving us a general idea of the game concept. I say general idea because the final details are usually still evolving at this point. Next, we have to create robot concepts that address the key actions of the challenge. We'll usually create a chart and rough robot sketches like these from 2017 to make sure the robots address all of the scoring, gathering, and endgame options without actually designing any real mechanisms or showing a real robot. We'll then scour the internet for thematic and artistic references for inspiration, and then hand that off to the animation team to do their magic. That paddle bot looked like this in the final animation for gathering fuel, scoring in a low goal, and climbing in the endgame. Given an understanding of the game and the robot requirements, we then create a script and a crude storyboard that touches on all the key elements and scenes of the animation. This is the storyboard from 2019. You can see it's just a bunch of crude graphics and stick figures walking through the various scenes. Over the next month or so, the storyboard will typically go through dozens of iterations between us and FIRST until we all agree on every element, and most importantly, we agree on the voiceover. The voiceover is key because it sets the cadence of the animation. It's what the animators use to time every aspect of the entire project. Sometimes we use that voiceover directly, which is the same voice that you're hearing right now. And sometimes we overdub it with other talent to provide a more dynamic feel, like this 2017 Steamworks voiceover by Professor Elemental.
Jolly good luck, all you robo-steampunkers. I can't wait to see your brilliant solutions.
or the 2020 and 2021 voiceover by FIRST alumni Eric Lawrence.
Welcome to the 2020 FIRST Robotics Competition.
While the storyboard is being refined, the animators take the CAD files of the actual field and remodel and texture them for the animation, which includes subtleties like shadows and even robot tracks in the carpet. Now this is a bit of a challenge because we never see the real field. FIRST doesn't actually build the very first field until after we finished modeling the animation field. So we have to do all of this blind. That's right, what you see in the game animation was created without ever seeing a real field. For example, if you look close at this shield generator from 2020, you can see where our guess was close, but not exactly the same as the real thing. This is further complicated by the fact that the CAD files aren't usually finalized until around December, long after we've created our version of the field. So it really is amazing that it looks as close to the real thing as it does. The animators also create human players while we're working on a storyboard. We try to incorporate the game theme into the human players each year, but sometimes we completely miss the point. In 2018, for example, the theme was supposed to be a retro 8-bit arcade-style graphics. So we presented these human players, which were based on the 1980s arcade game Tron. That was rejected in favor of something with lower resolution, more in line with the game concept. Of course, you may recognize those human players because we repurposed them for the 2019 game. So now we have a solid storyboard, final voiceover, which cannot change from this point forward because it sets the cadence for the entire animation, the field modeled, the robots modeled, and the human players modeled. It's time to bring it all together and animate frame by frame all of the movement and action outlined in the storyboard. This is incredibly tedious. It typically takes a couple months and about 2,500 CPU hours of render time. 2,500 hours? That's 3 to 4 months of render time. That can't be right, can it? Well, yeah, it is right for a single CPU, but we built a server farm just for things like this, so we can distribute the load across many high-end PCs, which reduces the render time to a week or two. For the first pass, there's always errors and issues, so each scene usually requires multiple passes. The game animation requires a lot of computer horsepower. Last year, however, we started using a newer rendering technology, which is a lot faster and massively expedites that process. Where we used to have to render through Christmas and New Year's just to meet the kickoff deadline, now we could wrap things up before the holidays. It's really nice not having to work on the game animation Christmas Day, which we did do for the first couple of years. After the animation's rendered, we then add background music, sound effects, and scoring details. Now that's important. If you listen carefully, the scoring is never mentioned in the voiceover. It only appears as a graphic overlay. That's because the voiceover is one of the first things we have to do, while the scoring details aren't finalized until much later. One of the very last things we do is add the intro. We like to find fun ways to introduce the animation, but we put that off till last just in case we run out of time and have to do something quick. This intro from 2016 actually modeled the real camera that took this shot of the real field. We then viewed the animation through that virtual model camera so we could get a one-to-one match and perfectly synchronize the transition between the real field and the animated one. Now, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the huge impact Dave Lavery had on all of this. He single-handedly created the game animation for 12 years by himself. Dave did an amazing job of conveying the game concept with simple, to-the-point, concise animations. Dave's work is near and dear to our hearts because it was his animations, along with the original animation contest sponsored by Autodesk, that helped inspire Automation Direct's lead animator to go into animation. He started FRC Team 1746, but ended up never touching a robot. He got hooked on animation and never looked back. He now works here at Automation Direct creating animated promos for our products, and he has an online presence where he teaches others how to create animated graphics to use in their own live streams. So, from the bottom of our hearts, we want to thank Dave Lavery for his pioneering work on creating the FIRST Robotics game animation, inspiring our lead animator to get into animation, and creating this opportunity for Automation Direct. Automation Direct also uses the game animation assets to create images for the formal game manual, the transitions you see at events that show who won the current match, the virtual reality simulation we produce each year, and a 3D printed scale model of the field. Our animation team also created the Alliance selection animation you see at events. And of course, Automation Direct now sponsors the annual Digital Animation Award to help inspire future animators. At Automation Direct, we fundamentally appreciate that FIRST really is more than robots.
A huge thanks to Automation Direct for their incredibly helpful yearly contribution. It really makes each game come alive, and we encourage teams to consider creating an animation as part of your game design submission. Now let's hear how the other FIRST programs design their games, beginning with FIRST LEGO League and Jillian Mordarski. Jillian, welcome.
Hi, Blair. I'm so excited to be here today. My name is Jillian Mordarski, and I am a FIRST LEGO League Challenge developer. It says I'm on.
So, oh yeah, you're on. You're I can hear you. I can see you.
Great.
Can you see me?
I can see you. You look wonderful.
So Jillian, now we've taken a pretty deep dive into the FRC game design process, but FIRST LEGO League is much different. A lot of it's the same, but a lot of it's different. You've got some external forces at work with FIRST LEGO League. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how FIRST LEGO League Game Design Challenge works?
Sure. I think there was a great point brought up earlier that kids love stories. Adults love stories, but kids absolutely love hearing a good story. So that's where we start. We love to start with a fun story that talks about the theme and where we might be headed. That's not an exact thing. We don't actually decide on that for about a year, but it's something we sit on and think about for a very long time. So that has always been a really important part of the process. From there, we talk to experts in the field, which kind of set up where that story is going to go.
So what's the size of your game design group? How many experts do you pull in that initial phase?
So that's a great question, Blair. We've had up to 20 experts from around the world join us. This year we have slightly fewer, with 5 joining us. And we've really taken to heart the stories that can be told. So to hear a really good story, you need that time to have a discussion with someone to understand their likes, their dislikes, what's going on in their field. And we hear the most amazing stories because of this. My favorite was the Into Orbit season, where we were hearing from astronauts and people that worked at NASA, and just a whole group of super amazing people that usually you don't get to talk to every day.
Okay, so you've got your story, you've got your theme for the year, you've got your story, you've got your experts who've come in. What's the next step in the process?
So the next step is the challenge development team here at FIRST and LEGO Education talk about what we've seen, common threads that we really like. As was mentioned earlier in the broadcast, there's a lot of diversity. Everyone's thinking something slightly different. Everyone's imagining something different in their mind. So really talking that through, coming up with little sketches in our notebooks and saying, this is what I think it should look like, or this is what I think I should look like. And at that point, Lego starts to kind of think, well, what could a mission look like? What could a Lego model look like? And we have a lot of input into that, as well as how the story plays out. So that's a super exciting part of being in this process, is working with Lego and helping their designers come up with ideas to be used in the mission models later on.
Yeah, who designs the challenges? Both the whole game design group, or does it fall mostly on the Lego staff?
So it falls heavily on the FIRST staff to come up with the story and where we want to head. we have a wonderful engineer that works here. His name is Mike Grenier, and he comes up with a lot of the initial ideas and says to Lego, hey, I think this idea would work, or this might work. And the whole team has input into it, but Lego takes those ideas and starts iterating on that. And they might come back to us and say, what do you think about this? We're a little unsure about these parts and these, how this might work on the field. And then we get to kind of work back and forth with them as they're iterating, creating models. We're coming up with ideas on how the game should be played, if there's any strategy involved, how hard certain missions are compared to others. So there's a team of about 6 of us between FIRST and LEGO Education that are really working on this year round. This is a 1.5 to 2 year project for each season. So we do pull in a lot of people at FIRST and LEGO, but our core team is about 5 to 6 people.
So how many models do the Lego builders make, and how many does that get pared down to? How many missions on average?
That's a really great question. So we start off with a goal of about 30, and we want to get to about half of that. So 50 models probably at most. 30 we start off because Lego's going to go back and make some iterations on this, and we can kind of see what they would look like and how they would actually work on the field, and how a robot might engage with them. So it really does. Sometimes we have 20 that we love, and we have to pare it down, and we have to think about, what we could really use. And everyone wants a different thing and thinks that certain model's cool. So it does take some time to get down to those 15 that we think are really awesome for the season.
And when you finally get there to the 8 to 15, do you is there another external review team, or do you build robots that play the missions, and who prototypes and does that?
So that's a great question. Lego has its own set of testing that they do on products. So age appropriateness, will it break easily? What are the colors? Do they make sense? Lego knows what they're doing. So they help greatly in that sense. But then we have volunteers out in the field that are helping us. They may test something. We may run some ideas by them. We don't see the models in the mat all together finalized until about springtime. So we release in August, so it doesn't give us a lot of time to actually test the robot on the official mat. So we do a lot of experimenting and iteration and, working off of some drafts rather than the real thing.
Well, great. Now, you're not going to go too far, because we're going to bring you back with the final segment for the live Q&A.
Great.
Boy, it's nice. It's nice to have Lego in your back pocket as on your game design team, isn't it?
It is, and my son thinks I'm really cool because of it, so that helps.
Well, that's the most important thing. Thanks, Jillian. We'll see you in a little bit.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank Jillian for taking us behind the scenes of FIRST LEGO League and explaining such a different process than FRC's. And now we're going to move on to the FIRST Tech Challenge game design process with game designer Manny Lowe. Welcome, Manny.
Thank you, Blair. Pleasure to be with you, and hello to all the teams out there. My name's Manny Lowe, and I'm the Mississippi FIRST Tech Challenge affiliate partner.
All right, Manny, you're batting cleanup here. We've heard about the FRC and the FLL game design process. Why don't you take us through how FIRST Tech Challenge does their game design process? How does it start?
It starts, we try to stay ahead about 1.5 to 2 years out. It's very similar to the way FIRST Robotics Competition does their concept of game design. We come up with different storyboards. We get together in New Hampshire, where we are going to go over some potential previous games, try to incorporate that back into what do we potentially like about that? How can we evolve what we've learned from from the most recent games into new technology? And we generally iterate. We bring in a champion for each of the different games. We also bring in some external people to help us out. Some of those can be some alumni, other partners, just to get us kickstarted on some ideas. We not necessarily going into the actual mechanics of the game, but just some good ideas coming through.
And how large or small is your game design group? How many people?
We have a core group of 7 people, 6 volunteers, and Aaron Fadden, who is our first challenge program manager, that takes care of us. We come from all different backgrounds, some electrical engineers, mechanical engineers. I'm a software engineer by trade. We also have other aspects that we play as what we do for First Tech Challenge. For example, Mark Edelman and I are both program delivery partners. Joe Parado from Delaware is our CAD programmer. Michael Coleman from Florida is a wonderful electrical engineer, and Jessica Boland Smith from Ohio is a current First Tech Challenge coach and gives us a team perspective. And we're generally a good group of people coming together. Oh, I forgot to mention Kevin Rudd from Maryland.
Yeah, don't leave out Kevin. So how we've heard a lot about story and theme, Manny. How important is that, and when does that get layered into the First Tech Challenge process?
It comes in at various different stages of the game design. Sometimes we'll start with a game. We start by saying, okay, what kinds of aspects of the game do we want the teams to focus on? Sometimes we will start with the theme, the overall theme, and say, okay, let's build a story behind it and figure out how the robots will play. So it's comes in 50-50 halfway through, and it depending on when we get what the theme is going to be, how we going to influence what the game design is going to be part of.
And I don't think we've talked about the timeline for how far out are you working in First Tech Challenge?
We're about a year and a half to 2 years try to be ahead of the game. Unfortunately, we couldn't get together this year for COVID reasons. So we've been meeting via Zoom and teleconference and webinars, both with our as a team twice a week, as well as doing some aspects of little prototyping and some idea generation that we'll send back and forth via emails to each other.
And finally, we've heard a lot about external review groups and how critical those are, more critical than some programs than others. But how does that work for First Tech Challenge? You bring people in to look at the game, play the game, review the rules?
Yes, we do. We've got Andy Mark engineers on board with us to help us with the field development, because they are our partners in dealing with that. We also deal with some external reviewers like referees or other partners on how easy it might be for this game to come across. One of our goals is to make sure that, like for FIRST Robotics Competition, we want to make sure that at least 60% of our rookie teams can actually get something out of the game. They can participate. They can be done. Part of the game can be done by those rookie teams, as well as making some aspects of the game challenging for the veterans. So we bring those throughout the process, and we do some prototyping. We constantly prototype both game elements as well as how field looks with CAD drawings and other things like that.
Cool. Well, don't go too far, Manny, because we're going to bring you back for the Ask Me Almost Anything segment at the end, and you'll represent First Tech Challenge. But thanks for giving us a look behind the process for First Tech Challenge.
My pleasure. Good luck to all the teams out there.
All right. And if you want to explore the FTC design process in more detail, you can check out the recent FTC Game Design show featuring their game design team on YouTube. Now, one common thread we've heard from all our game designers is to reach outside of your own game design team to get feedback. And we have an external feedback activity which describes a process for soliciting feedback and input from those outside your design team and can help your team understand the value of doing so. Also consider that you can even use another team to get this external feedback. So reach out, reach out, reach out. All right, we're getting towards the end of the show and there's only one thing left to do, and that's ask our game designers your questions. Finally time to get there. We're gonna pull in some of the game designers we've presented today for our Ask Me Almost Anything live Q&A. So from First Legally, we welcome back Jillian, from First Tech Challenge, Manny, and from the First Robotics Competition, Amanda and Danny. Okay. Let's start with a question for, let's see. Jillian, I'm gonna start with you. Question is, what is your favorite model and why?
So that's a really hard question to answer, Blair. There are so many amazing models. In talking with the team, I think we all kind of share a similar view that from the Into Orbit season, there was a 3D printer that most teams don't know came from visiting NASA. So it took regolith from Mars and printed 3D bricks out of it to make a building. So that was incorporated on as a mission on the field and was something we saw firsthand at NASA.
Cool. Okay, our next question is from Mecha Muffin for FTC. Then we'll have all the programs answer. Does the GDC have an idea of what a really good robot would look like at the start of the season in terms of how it would solve the design challenges? Manny?
Well, thank you, Mecha Muffin, for the question. We generally go in with figuring out what the different game elements are going to be and how robots potentially would interact with those game elements. And depending on whether they're going to be game elements are going to be shot or picked up and placed, or movement on the field. So as far as a really good robot, we know that we know every year we go in there and say, okay, the students are always so much smarter than we are. So we cannot design a robot that can be as any good as a really good robot can be out there. So we try to make sure that some of the elements that we design into the game can be done by a majority of the robots out there.
And Jillian, you want to answer it for First Lego League?
Sure, I'd love to. That's a great point, that you need to make a game that you can do, but most of the time we have teams that are so good at solving these missions and coming up with strategies that even our engineers can't figure them out, and they need to go to an event and see a team actually doing this. So it's really cool when you can go to an event and see a mission that you weren't able to solve yourself, and see kids half your age or a quarter of your age being able to create a robot that actually performs.
Wow. And Danny, do you want to answer that for First Robotics Competition? Because the next question is for Amanda.
Yeah, actually in FRC, our goal is to have a low floor and a high ceiling. So we typically try to focus more on, reducing the complexity for a team to, do the bare minimum to be able to solve a challenge, and then just make it so that, the teams who want to go farther can literally go farther, like the rocket that I have here behind me.
All right. Next question is for Amanda, and then we can have all programs weigh in. Where do you look for game inspiration?
That's a great question, and it's really kind of simple. Anywhere and everywhere. we've looked, really kind of focuses on what do we want to see robots complete in that game and what goes along with the theme. So we've researched with board games, working with Disney, movies, even books, so anywhere and everywhere.
Manny, do you want to answer that for First Tech Challenge?
Sure. We actually, on our meetings that we've had up at New Hampshire, we've actually, earlier in the game, previous seasons ago, we used to go out on field trips throughout Manchester, and we would walk up and down Home Depot aisles and looking at things that are for sale, or even PetSmart or other things, saying, "Hey, that might make a good game piece," or toy stores. When Toys R Us had a big box store, when we would walk through and say, "This looks like something cool that we can play with," or "This would be a good concept that we could potentially use." The toilet flange for one of the early seasons that we had for FTC.
Yeah, that's great. Like, go to your local toy store. All right,
Yep.
And Jillian, for First Lego League, where do you look for inspiration?
I think Amanda said it best. It can come from anywhere. A favorite of mine is from teams. Their suggestions. First Lego League teams always bring up a toilet somehow, so we try to integrate things like that. It's really fun to hear what teams want to do, but also real life. We included sewer drains and all of that in our aqua adventure season. And it was great because everyone knew what they were. People were fighting in our group about what they would look like because they look different in other parts of the world than our part. So it's just really cool that it can come from anywhere.
You're right. All right, that's right. Be open to it. Be open. Get inspired from everywhere.
Yeah.
Outdoors, indoors. Okay, next question is goes to Danny first, and then it can go to all programs. This is from NJ Chaco. Why hasn't First done a water game?
Yes, the mythical water game. Motors can actually run underwater without any problems whatsoever. Problem is, most other things can't. And so, if you want to be able to pay for, all of the waterproof sealing for batteries, the sealing for your control system, we could potentially do a water game. However, I don't know how many gymnasiums would allow us to erect, a 50-foot pool inside of their gymnasium. So I think if you can figure that out, that'll help us a lot.
Manny, First Tech Challenge, talking about a water game yet?
Same answers. It's always fun to basically tease out the fact that we got a water game this year, which, I mean, hey, we don't tell anybody this, but we might have a water game next year. But just don't tell anybody. But the other thing is, it's just hard to move all that water. Plus, all that water has to fit in the back of a van. That's one of our design constraints when we transport the field.
We would have to use we would have to use the same water at every event to make it fair
Exactly.
for all the teams, just like we use the same field. Jillian, First Lego League, talking about a water game at all?
No, we have not. It would be very cool, but I think logistics might be a little difficult in terms of getting water to every game.
All right, next question is for Amanda. This is from MathWiz. How do you go about balancing point values for specific tasks to ensure that each task is balanced correctly?
This is a very good question, and it's actually one of my one of the favorite parts I enjoy during our game design journeys we go on. Everyone kind of works together, and we have this point discussion of filling it. We all fill out individually at first all these different these spreadsheets that kind of balance like the movie in your head of where do you see this task over this task. Should a ball scored in auto be how many times more worth same ball scored in teleop. Then we go through and show like, okay, here's all these like scoring actions that happen in a match. Who do you think should win this match just by looking at the scoring actions? Don't do any math in your head. Don't do any, equations. Just kind of what is your gut feel that should happen. Once everyone's completed this, we all the answers get compiled together, and we sit down and go through it all and really see where everyone's heading till we get what is the closest to match all our objectives and to get those kind of scenario matches to agree with how we think they should go.
All right, great. Manny, want to answer that from FTC? We had a follow-up from you from Ian Start Zero. How do you go about balancing the game in terms of point values for each game mechanic?
It's an iterative process as we go forward. But one of the things that we'd like to come into play is a balance between the autonomous period, the driver control period, and the end game. We don't want any robots to basically win the match in the autonomous period, nor do we want it to, and we would like to see in the end game, that possibility of having teams basically saying, okay, can they do it or can they do it, and seeing just the excitement at the end of endgame. We generally try to estimate what the points would be based on a robot that has only just a couple of rookie robots on the field that can only push game elements around, versus what if it was a medium capability robot or a super high version robot, so a big alliance pair, someone that you would see on the finals at championships. So one of the things that we try to incorporate is making sure that the points balance off and we can see that progression in FTC.
All right, thanks. For Amanda, another one from MathWiz. How does the GDC ensure that too much work does not fall on scorekeepers to keep the game complete but advanced enough for high-level teams?
So that's a really big balance game. We really want to incorporate as much automated scoring and real-time scoring as possible, but it's really down to what is possible to be really reliable automated scoring, what is easy to be live scoring but not necessarily done by sensors or that, and keeping that balance of field setup as well. I know we looked in Destination Deep Space at one time to see if we could sense every game object that was scored, and it was like 100 and something sensors going to be on the field, and we ended up scrapping that just because the humans could do it just as well. So it's really a balance of a lot of different things to make sure that real-time scoring is still happening and automated scoring where we can.
All right, great. Danny, the next one is for you. MathWiz, man. MathWiz is asking these questions. How do game designers go about ensuring that the game is easy enough for rookie teams to complete, but advanced enough for high-level teams? I know that's something we work really, really, really hard on. How are you so sure that it's going to work?
In short, we're not. We do a lot of work ourselves. We're all coaches and mentors, and many of us have already been on FRC teams or FTC teams, and we have a little bit, it's a little bit gut check, and it's a little bit external review, an additional gut check. But a lot of what we do is, we try to design the games, and then we sometimes even play the games. We'll build a kit chassis and say, can someone actually reasonably do this? And we'll hand the controls over to somebody who's relatively experienced and say, do it. And if they can do it, then fantastic. If not, then we say, why couldn't we do it, and how could we make it a little bit easier for someone to design something? Having years of match videos and robot analysis online really helps too.
Yeah, and we heard in the evolution of game design at first video, I think both Kate and Frank spoke to trying to make teams leave the event with some sense of satisfaction and accomplishment. So I know we spent a lot of time on that. Okay, next question is it's for Manny from Dansman805. What process does the FTC GDC go through when testing field elements?
We go through try to do as much prototyping as we can on the material aspects of each of the field elements. We do some 3D printing and CNC machining for some of the field elements, sometimes some of the game elements out of that. We like to put together some CAD models of what we think the field would look like and some potential robots on the field, so we can do center of gravity analysis and make sure that for both the field element as well as for robots interacting with the field elements. And sometimes we actually build a robot or the mechanisms for a robot for doing shooters. For example, this year's game, we took a lot of aspects of what the rings were going to be, what kind of material it would be, and then how would that feed through a typical single wheel shooter. And we work with Andy Mark on doing with that. One of the nice things about doing Andy Mark, especially working with Andy Mark, especially with the video process, is we will ask on Tuesday for a can you put together a shooter that can shoot these rings? And they'll say, okay, here it is. On Thursday, we see that in action. So it's we take a lot of time in dealing with that.
Thanks, Manny. All right, the next question is for Jillian. This is from Fifi603. What is it like having members of your team work at Lego?
It's pretty cool, as you can imagine. We work with Lego education based out of Denmark. So I have a lot of colleagues that don't even live in the same country as me. COVID has definitely had us work in different spaces and have to connect online. However, we usually get to visit each other. So Lego will come visit us in the United States, and the team gets to go over to Denmark and understand things like how the Lego factory is run and the philosophy that they have there, that learning through play is key. Every room has Lego in it. Everyone encourages you to play. So it's a pretty cool place to work with. And they're just a lot of fun. And I have so many great coworkers there.
So maybe I should ask the follow-up, what's it like working with your fellow FIRST employees?
As well. They don't give me tours of Lego, but our team here is so great. We're like a family. So we're definitely a very well tight-knit team.
Yes, it's a great team. Okay, next question is for Danny. This is a big one. Put your thinking cap on for this one. This is big picture here. This is from Doormaster 1. How important is the game in game design? He can't hear me. I think he's saying it's really important because otherwise it's just design. Danny?
Geez, Sam. Sorry. All right. So I want to come at this from two different angles. I want to come at it from, early on, how important is it for you to have a great game early on? And the answer is not really as important that you have a great game, because during your game design process, it's going to turn into a great game. When you've got great people working, you've got great external review people, you've got sponsors who are helping you out, it's going to be a great game. When you actually get into game design and you're looking at the game, of course the game is very important to us. Yes, we did release Recycle Rush, but the game is very important to us. We want to be able to play the game. If we aren't excited about the game when we go to show it off at kickoff, we've done everyone a huge disservice. So the game is honestly first and foremost, and we make a lot of decisions to make sure that the game itself is we do it so much work to make sure that the game is fun to play, it's exhilarating, that it's interesting, from start to finish. And so really, the game at the end, the game is more important than anything else for us.
Yeah, great answer. And I can speak, I think, for all the FIRST staff, that when any game gets unveiled, we feel like the community is like opening this birthday present, and we're just wondering if they're going to like the present that we bought for them. And it always has this great feeling of we hold our breath. So the game really is important. All right, next question is for Amanda. It's from Block Ninja 22. How do you go about fitting all game aspects into the short match time? And she says, thanks.
So that's a very iterative process. We've got a lot of experience on the game design teams, match producing this, so we can kind of get a feel of how we think how long cycles may take and how many game pieces, but then we come down and we start, walking through matches and what we predict time will be. And we really want to balance more than just make sure all the actions can be completed, but to make sure that, the game is exciting week one as well as all the way to championships. So it's really a balance of iterating and knowledge and just getting it all to fit what we want to see in the game.
Great, thanks. Moving on to Danny now. This is from Chicken Streamer 101. Have you ever thought of having 3 or 4 alliances competing in the same game?
For this one, I'm going to ask for forgiveness rather than permission, and just go ahead and let a little bit of the cat out of the saying that nothing is sacred when it comes to games, game design, having a great game. And so in some of our game designs that have been in our pool for a while, have had fields of not necessarily squarish or even rounded squarish sizes, right? Think of like maybe we would have a Y-shaped field, and you'd have 2 versus 2 versus 2, 3 alliances on the field. That's absolutely something that is in our realm of possibility. It's something that a lot of us are very excited, one day to be able to do. There's a lot of benefits to the field configurations and the gymnasiums and the arenas that we play in, but one day we're going to come out and say, hey, guess what? There's a new field. There's a new game in town.
And, when you're designing your games teams, like one of the constraints on FIRST is trying to cycle enough teams through an event. And so if we have 3-on-3 or 4-on-4 or 5-on-5, we can get more teams cycled through an event. So that's sometimes, we moved to that a long time ago. And that's, it's not set in stone. Everything's up for grabs. But, one of the things, it's one of the considerations you have to have in making a game. Our next question goes to Amanda. It is from Kloppen0. How can someone get a job in game design for FIRST? What education and skills are required?
So there's really no prescribed path to become, game design. At FIRST, we have such a diverse group of people working here. So basically, like one step, you need to get a job with FIRST, and then working with FRC, eventually you might get the opportunity to join. But there's no, skill requirements or minimum anything except for working for FIRST.
Thanks, Amanda. And honestly, a lot of other departments, I think Frank talked about it, get pulled into that game design. First, sometimes at the secondary level, and then as a review level. So there are a lot of people. I mean, we use people from accounting, from marketing, First Lego League, First Tech Challenge people, we get their views from the EDI. So there's a lot of ways to come at the game design process. Okay, next one is for Manny from Leo GCAM. What type of testing did you do on the power shot targets in the FTC Ultimate Goal game?
We did lots of testing on it. And in fact, it actually found one of our early design field faults that we have with the game. One of the things is the original design of the game had the power shot targets completely vertical, and you had to knock them over completely horizontal. When we were testing with that, we found that if a ring hit one power shot, it generally knocked down all three. And so that's one of the reasons why our rules were modified through early in the season when we said you got to make sure that one ring hits one power shot in order for it to count. It can't hit the bar or anything else. And so we did our shooting testing. We wanted to make sure that a robot can shoot across the field and hit that power shot.
All right. Thanks, Manny. Okay, our final question. It is for Amanda. This is from Gene F343. Every program indicates that game design takes 1 to 2 years. What suggestions do you have for teams to shorten the time to meet this year's challenge? It's a great question.
I think we've heard it a few times during the show, but fail early, fail often. You don't want to get kind of stuck in one path or rut and really not get going in a game design. Don't be afraid to go backwards and add another brainstorming, even if it's take an hour to just brainstorm how different end games could work, or where do you want to see robots start, especially in this virtual environment most of us are working in. Definitely don't be afraid of being able to show visuals that aren't physical prototypes or directly in CAD. PowerPoint or Paint easily gets visuals across so people can kind of share their movies in their heads better, but definitely fail early, fail often, and don't get frustrated if you feel like you're going backwards. Sometimes you got to go backwards before you can continue going forwards.
Great, and it's such a great question. Let's ask each program. So, Jillian, answer the same question for me.
Sure, that's a really great question, and I think Amanda touched on a lot of important points. I think visuals are really important when you're describing something to someone. Some things get lost, so whether it be a drawing or built from Lego or any other way you can think to get your point across, that's super important. The other thing is there's always going to be changes you want to make, and sometimes you just have to say, okay, this is good and we're going to move on from here. You can always go back. There's definitely seasons that we've put out and we were like, man, we wish we did this. So there's always something you're going to want to change no matter what.
Great. Manny?
Sure. The one thing, the adage, a picture's worth 1,000 words is definitely true when it comes to game design. Take advantage of the tools that are out there. Animation Direct has a 3D model that you can print a basic field, and then you can plop different elements into it, so you actually see and build the field as you're going along, and you can see different things. You can hunker on down and look at how the driver station teams can see on the field in order to look through that. CAD is very good if you've got a good CAD developer to help along with that. But if not, then someone who can draw on the back of a napkin. Those are sometimes the best designs that come through on that.
Great. And finally, Danny?
Yeah, my biggest piece of suggestion: don't be afraid to chase a good idea. You don't have to necessarily, and what I mean by that is you don't have to have a perfect idea in order to chase. Just chase a good idea. We're not looking necessarily for perfection. and you'll probably make it better in the process anyway. So that just don't stymie yourself in looking for that perfect answer. Go with a good answer and then see where it takes you.
All right, great. Wise advice from our game design experts. At the beginning of the show, I guaranteed that our viewers would learn something, get some tips and tricks. I think you all delivered for me. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Great answers, everybody. All right, we're going to start wrapping up the show here. A big thank you to all our presenters and to our audience for watching the show. Hopefully we spark some ideas that will aid you in your pursuit of the perfect game in this year's Game Design Challenge. Couple of final reminders. Be sure to check out the supplier videos on the FRC Judge Show, which posted today at 2 o'clock, about a half an hour ago, on the FRC YouTube channel. And then tune in live on June 30th to ask the FRC judges your questions. And speaking of judges, we're going to need a lot of them to review all the amazing Game Design, Infinite Recharge at Home, and First Innovation Challenge submissions. Judging this year is all done remotely, so it's very convenient. You never have to leave home. Judges can select the challenges they'd like to judge, but note that the minimum age for judges at FIRST is 23 years old for FRC. Please help spread the word. Previous FIRST volunteers should go to the volunteer dashboard to sign up, or if you're a new volunteer, go to this website to register and join the FIRST fun. Now, our next episode of Beyond the Bots will celebrate our favorite resource, mentors. It's National Mentoring Month, so be sure to show some love to your mentors with a big virtual high five or text thanking them, and do that every day. We've got a terrific show lined up celebrating all things mentor, and it'll air on Friday, January 29th at 12 p.m. here on FIRST TV. And in addition to celebrating FIRST mentors, we'll also be announcing the lucky winners of the Mentoring Month raffle. Big swag coming at you. All right, be sure to tune in and watch as a team. Thanks for watching this show. We had a lot of good stuff in here. I hope you had some great takeaways. Be well and happy designing. Take care.